All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we are going to talk about the Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford fight and one of the reasons Stephen ESPINOZA let slip that this fight may not be as valuable to Showtime and other networks as we, the fans, think, and could be a reason why the money may not be there for the fight. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about the business of boxing, specifically the business of boxing around the fight with Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. and something that Stephen ESPINOZA, who runs Showtime Sports, said that could let us know what a big problem with making this fight is. Now, before I get into that, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, please accept my invitation to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so that you can be notified when we release more videos. And if you are a longtime subscriber and supporter to the channel, please, thank you so much for all of the support that you give watching the videos that we do on a daily basis and the live streams we do on a daily basis. Your support is essential and greatly, greatly appreciated. Okay, so let's get into this. As we know, the biggest fight that many people want to see in boxing is the Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford fight. It is without a doubt, in my opinion, it is the best fight for fight fans that can be made in the sport of boxing. However, it does not look obvious that that fight is going to be made. And Stephen ESPINOZA, who is the president of Showtime Sports, said some things yesterday in an interview talking about Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis that I think shed a little bit of light on why he may not be willing to invest the money that people would think would be obvious to invest in a fight like this. Now, as you know, you have they're big fights, and there are fights that are really big and important as far as like the skill sets of the fighters, right? So take, for example, you have the relationship with Jake Paul that Showtime has, where Jake Paul is not really a boxer, or I guess you can call him a boxer at this point, but he's not really a boxer, top-notch boxer. I don't think anybody would confuse him with Roy Jones Jr. And you have him fighting Hasim Rahman. Now, that fight will probably do a lot of pay-per-view buys, or a good number of pay-per-view buys, but it's not a very important fight to the sport of boxing, right? Where you may have a fight like Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez, that is a very, very good fight for boxing, and it's two of the best people in the unification at 130, right? So that's the difference between those. And I think that is what he sees with the fight between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence. Now, why do I say that? Because of how he described the fight with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis. And the key words that he had said that I have used many times is two different fan bases. And so he said with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, he said that he believes that's probably only a couple fights in boxing that are bigger than that fight. And when he listed the reasons what he really thought that they were big, he said two different fan bases. If you look at the fight and the fight with Canelo Alvarez, he said, well, with Canelo Alvarez, there's nobody really else in boxing that has put those type of numbers up over a long period of time. And he could do 800,000. Now, he said, I think since 2017, since the Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight, that's the biggest pay-per-view that there's been. The second biggest pay-per-view that there's been was the Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury 2 that he said did somewhere between 700 and 800,000 pay-per-views. Everything other than that has done less than 700,000 pay-per-views, but he believed that Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis could do good numbers, upwards of 400,000, 500,000 pay-per-views if it really took off, because they have two different fan bases. Now, does that apply to Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford? No, it does not. Number one, you have Terence Crawford, who does not have a history of doing big pay-per-views on himself. Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr. also does good numbers, but not huge numbers independent by himself. So that investment that they may give based off that Canelo Alvarez model doesn't apply. And also, you do not have two distinct fan bases with Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. I talked about this on live streams before, but if you would assume, and I asked people, there was a couple, 100 people in the chat at the time, several, like 6,000 or 7,000 people over the course of the live stream. But I think maybe 600 or 700 people in there at the time that I asked the question. It's like, how many of you bought both Errol Spence Jr.'s pay-per-views and Terence Crawford's pay-per-views? And most people said that I bought both, right? Either they stole both or they bought both, right? So if you're looking at how many pay-per-views they'll do, you can't look at Errol Spence Jr. and say, okay, Errol Spence Jr. does 350,000, Terence Crawford does 150,000. That means between the two of them, you have 500,000 pay-per-view buys. What you really may have is just 350,000 pay-per-view buyers, because because those 350 that bought Errol Spence, 150 of them bought Terence Crawford. And it was it may just be the fact that, 200,000 just did not buy the Terence Crawford fight for whatever reason. Either they're not really tremendous fans of him, or, didn't feel like that particular fight was worthy. But by pointing to the two different fan bases with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, he's obviously paying attention to the fact that the audiences don't cannibalize on each other. It also works and makes sense when you talk about all the other pay-per-views that have been made that Showtime likes to make and the PBC likes to make. They like Latinos and blacks fighting each other, because those are two different fan bases, right? Where if you have somebody that may buy pay-per-views for Ryan Garcia, those guys that are buying, pay-per-view, if they will be willing to buy pay-per-views for Ryan Garcia, or better yet, Canelo Alvarez, if they have, the people that are buying pay-per-views for Canelo Alvarez may not buy the fight for Jamal Charlo, but the people that buy for Jamal Charlo, right, more people that like Jamal Charlo may actually buy if he's fighting Canelo Alvarez. So, and I don't think that dynamic is going to change as far as the amount of money that these guys are going to invest, or being willing to invest in fights where you have the demographic, where it's basically a finite number of people that are in that demographic that are going to buy those fights. And I know for certain that Stephen ESPINOZA and Showtime are very, very conscious of those demographics, because they did a presentation several years ago talking about those demographics and how blacks and Latinos were the major force behind boxing, and the percentage of hardcore boxing fans that they have. So those guys have done polls on they will have all of the numbers for the pay-per-views that they've done over the years. And more than likely, that's the reason why these guys are not going to be willing to put out maybe the type of money that Terence Crawford wants in a guarantee. And those guys they're going to force that to a situation where you have to get your money on the back end. And that may just not be working for Terence Crawford as far as how, much risk he's willing to take going into that fight. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting to hear Stephen ESPINOZA say that. Some people might have missed that if you're not really into like corporate jargon, but it was definitely there. And as he applied it to Terence, to Gervonta and Tank, so it's there when he's talking about paying for Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Deuces.